As seems to be a running theme with Hifiman headphones, the Ananda is named for the Sanskrit word meaning bliss or divine joy. That's similar to the Deva, which meant divine, and the Sundara, which meant beautiful. I previously gave the Sundara a glowing review, and it remains my top pick, particularly in the mid-fi headphone space of headphones around about $500 or less. Now, the Hifiman Ananda is the most high-end and most expensive headphone I've heard to date, although I realise that the sub-$1,000 price range isn't all that high-end these days. Now, if following the idea that you get what you pay for, I'm actually expecting quite a lot from the Ananda. So, is this the best headphone that I've ever heard? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Noel, and this is Wheezy Reviews, and each week I take a look at something audio related and let you know what I think. So if you're into that kind of thing, then make sure you subscribe. Now, this may turn out to be a long review. You know how I go in for those long and detailed reviews, so there will be timestamps in the description if you want to skip around. And full disclosure, Hifiman did send these over to me. They loaned these to me for my honest opinion. And as always, whether I pay for something myself or I get sent a review sample, I'm always going to give you my honest take on them. So let's briefly cover the spec then. The Hifiman Ananda weighs around 399 grams without the cable. It features a planar magnetic driver with a 25 ohm impedance and 103 dB sensitivity. And I'll let you know straight out of the gate, these are super efficient. I was simply absolutely stunned by how easy they are to drive. Now, my JDS Atom, it barely even breaks a sweat driving the Ananda. And of course, that means that you're going to have absolutely no issues driving these from any of your mobile devices, such as your mobile players, your mobile phones, and whatnot. Simply excellent work, Hifiman. These are probably the most sensitive planars that I've heard so far. Definitely the most sensitive planars that I've heard so far. And actually, in terms of a headphone in general, they are really sensitive. I'm really quite blown away. I wasn't expecting that. So on first look at the Hifiman Ananda, there's absolutely no denying that this is a rather large pair of headphones. They've got the same sort of headband design as the Sundara. So they have the metal outer headband with the suspended leather headband. Same design there as the Sundara. So just like the Sundara, I find this design to be extremely comfortable in terms of its headband. Usually not a big fan of suspension headband designs, but due to the way that this leather piece is so incredibly flexible, it distributes the weight across your entire head, and it makes it incredibly comfortable. However, because it does share the same headband design as the Sundara, just like the Sundara, it doesn't have any lateral rotation, so you are kind of fixed with what you've got here. However, I mean, the headband is fairly flexible. You've got the angled ear pads rather. So in terms of lateral rotation, which you would want really for comfort, it is an odd move to miss that out, but I actually didn't find that it bothered me in any way. So they've obviously made up for that with a more flexible chassis and the angled ear pads, so it's not that much of a big deal. And speaking of those ear pads, they are simply massive. The Ananda has this sort of egg shape, unlike the Sundara, which is completely round. Putting them alongside the oval ear pads of the Sennheiser HD6XX, for example, I mean, just look at how big this Ananda is. It's massive. Plenty of room. So it doesn't matter how big your ears are. You can have these great big Dumbo ears. It's absolutely no problem. You're going to fit them in the Ananda with room to spare, probably. Still on the earpads, then the usual Hifiman design where you have, it's a hybrid design basically, so you have a leather on the outside, a fabric face on the inside, and then you've got a leather internal wall, which in this case is perforated. Unlike the Sundara, this does appear to be actual genuine leather, or if it's not genuine leather, it's definitely a more high-end pleather, a much nicer feeling pad, both in terms of its padding and the leather than on the Sundara. There's a bit of a step up there. This is a little bit softer, and this leather is definitely a pleather. And I'm not sure if the headband is also leather as well, or if it's the same material. It looks to be the same material, but definitely with the earpads, you're looking at a nice leather outer. It reminds me of like a sheepskin leather that you might see on like brainwaves or whatever earpads. Very, very nice. In terms of clamping force, I find that the clamping force on the Ananda is a bit more than on the Sundara. It's weird because if I just pull them apart here like this now, it doesn't really feel like it clamps that much more. And it may just be more about literally the sheer size of the Ananda versus the Sundara, which makes the clamping force seem higher on the Ananda than it is on the Sundara. I think some people don't get on with these big, tall earpads like this because it puts a lot of pressure on the jawline. I know that that's something that some people get some discomfort with the HD 650s or the 6XX, where the clamping force, particularly out of the box, the clamping force is pretty tight. And because they're a tall pad, they can put a bit of pressure on that jawline, and people find that uncomfortable. I mean, these give after a while. I'm sure the Ananda will give after a while. But on a more personal level, of these three headphones here, the Sundara is simply the most comfortable headphone. It fits me like a glove, basically. I really, really love the comfort of the Sundara. The Ananda isn't quite there, but it's not uncomfortable. Basically, it's not uncomfortable. It is something that I could sit there and listen to a few albums and not have a problem. The Sundara is something I could wear a lot longer, if you know what I mean. I could wear them probably most of the day and not really have any complaints. So the supplied cable then is just over 1.5 meters in length. It has a 3.5mm angled TRS jack here at the one end with a push-on quarter-inch adapter, and at the other end we have a double 3.5mm TRS connectors there. So this is the exact same cable design as on the HE4XX, the Sundara. So all these cables are going to be compatible. It's kind of like a tubular design, which looks like it's got some lits going inside it. So it's basically a tube. Instead of like your typical cable, which is all molded, this is a tube with some lits. You can just about see it inside. That won't come out on the camera, but it's a bit of a weird feeling cable because it feels like a tube, which it is a tube basically, but it's flexible enough. It's not microphonic or anything like that. So pretty nice cable. You do get another cable as well, which is 3 meters long, and that has a 6.35mm connector on it. I've been enjoying these Hifiman headphones so much, I've gone ahead and made myself a braided paracord cable specifically for the Hifiman cables, just for that bling factor, of course. In terms of the packaging then, this box here is on a par. It beats the really nice presentation box that you get with the HD 6XX and probably the 650. I don't know if they still do that with those headphones, but that's a really nice big box, all padded inside. And this one, it's all like leather covered with this little leather pull tab on it, and it's quite stiff to open. And inside, it's all lined with this velour material. Really quite nice, quite unexpected actually. So let's talk about how the Ananda sounds, and I'm going to say straight up that I really, really like how the Ananda sounds. They seem to have all of what makes the Sundara good, but they just sound a little bit more refined, would be the word to use. And I've seen it said elsewhere, I can't remember who said this, one of the other headphone reviewers on the tube, that the Ananda is basically the Sundara all grown up, and I think I have to agree with that. So throughout the sound section, I'm going to be talking about the Ananda, obviously, but I'm also going to be talking about the Sundara and, of course, the HD 6XX, which is my usual reference point when I'm doing all of my reviews. So the frequency response of the Ananda, to my taste at least, might be as close to perfect as any other headphone that I've ever heard, at least out of the box. Now, for those that don't yet know what my tastes are, I enjoyed something close to the Harman Target frequency response. So imagine something close to the HD 650, but with a little bit less energy at around about 3 kilohertz, a little bit more treble extension, a full bass extension with a little bit less of that mid-bass hump, and I think you'd be just about there. The Ananda, I think, pretty much delivers on this ideal. So let's talk more about how they sound, and I'm going to start out with bass, as I almost always start out with bass. In terms of the bass, you are looking at a really, really decent extension all the way down into the sub bass, and I've not heard a bass extension this complete on any other open-backed headphone, to the point that the Ananda is actually capable of doing justice to bassy genres like EDM and hip-hop, because it actually has the low and sub bass there to actually do justice to the track. So it's pretty impressive. Many other open-backed headphones, like the X2HR, for example, do have a stronger upper bass area, but they lack in the low and the sub bass extension, and instead they kind of just roll off the low end of the bass. Now, even the Sundara suffers from this lack of extension. Perhaps the only significant complaint that I actually have with the Sundara. But the bass on the Ananda definitely seems to have a much more linear response without any significant hump anywhere in its bass response. So the end result is a really good and even distribution of bass frequencies all the way down into the sub bass that is neither bass light or bass boosted. So it's pretty much Goldilocks as far as I'm concerned. This is the first open-backed headphone that I've heard that has a genuinely good bass response, and also the first planar headphone that actually displays that planar bass that people keep talking about. All the others, they kind of roll off like any other open-back dynamic. The Ananda is the first one that I've seen that actually has the extension into the sub bass. So as far as that's concerned, really impressive. I'm very happy with that. That's not to say that the Ananda is perfect, of course, and in terms of dynamics, the sense of speed, punchiness, and slam capability, I think that the Ananda does fall short versus the Sundara. In fact, this is particularly noticeable for percussive instruments like snares and toms, as well as to some extent kick drums. There's more of a snap or a punch to percussion on the Sundara than both the Ananda and the 6XX, for example. That said, the decent extension of the Ananda does make up for this by adding a certain depth to percussion that's not there on the other two headphones, and that's due to that additional low bass extension and sub bass extension. Thankfully, the comparative lack of punch to the Ananda versus the Sundara doesn't hold over to plucked instruments like bass guitars, for example, which sound typically plucked as they tend to with planar headphones. And there seems to be no lack of articulation with the Ananda at all. So as much as they don't have the same kind of punch that the Sundara has, they definitely don't lack in any articulation at all. It's also fair to say that without that mid-bass hump of the 6XX, or the extension of the Ananda, the Sundara is probably the leanest sounding of these three headphones. And that's not really a complaint, as I think that the Sundara's bass is incredibly articulate. It's perhaps more a reflection on how the bass of the 6XX has more mid-bass warmth than any real low bass. And I don't think that low end and the bass is really a strong point of the HD6XX or 650. And you're getting a much better low-end clarity with both the Sundara and the Ananda, as well as a much more articulate bass. The bass quality on these two headphones just leaves the 6XX in the dust, as far as I'm concerned. And like I said, whilst the Ananda doesn't have the punch of the Sundara, you are getting a good, articulate, clean, and linear-sounding bass with a decently deep extension that doesn't suffer from any kind of bloat. So pretty much spot on. Now you can follow a lot of what I said about the bass into the mid-range and treble. You don't have that percussive punch of the Sundara, but you also don't have that mid-bass warmth of the 6XX. So the result is that the low mids are much cleaner and clearer than on the 6XX. But moving into the upper mids and treble, where there are some areas of shoutiness or glare in many other headphones, even the 6XX, like that 3 kilohertz region, which can make electric guitars sound a little bit glassy or glary, for want of better terms, if that makes any sense. Now, you don't get any of that with the Ananda, And you don't really get any of that with the Sundara either, although I think in this area the Ananda is a little bit smoother. Hotel California, for example, is a track where the 6XX has a bit of glare in the guitars, and you get none of that harshness with the Ananda. You will get a little bit more energy and pluckiness with the Sundara here than you will with the Ananda. And vocals too are also a little bit more forwards, or at least more in pocket with the Sundara than they are with the Ananda. That's obviously going to be track dependent, but like on Hotel California, for example, it's quite obvious that the Sundara, the vocals had a lot more definition and clarity to them. They existed more in pocket in the mix than they did in the Ananda. In the Ananda, everything was very musically presented, but vocals didn't stand out as much. Not to say that they sounded recessed or anything, but more just like they had a sweet quality to them that didn't quite have the same forward presentation that you might expect. I'm not saying that the Ananda did a bad job here at all. I think it's going to be more about a personal preference thing than anything. Like I said, they don't sound recessed. They just don't sound as... they don't have the same prominence and presence in the mix as they do on the other two. Case in point there would be Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits, where the vocals with the Sundara, they were a lot more in pocket versus the Ananda, whereas with the Ananda, they were a little bit back into the mix rather than being a little bit more forwards. Treble is generally excellent with a great amount of detail on the Ananda, much like the Sundara, actually. I didn't find any issues with harshness, any sort of peakiness, any issues with sibilance. Extension is also pretty good, on par with the Sundara, and an improvement, absolutely an improvement on the 6XX, which comparatively lacks in air compared to these two. Overall, I found the Ananda to provide a very cohesive and musical presentation of most tracks in a similar way to the 6XX versus a slightly more edgy sort of vibe to the Sundara. The Sundara has a more edgy and exciting presentation than either of the other two, which actually, for my own personal taste, I really, really enjoy with the Sundara. You know, I like that punchiness and that energy that you get with the Sundara. But in terms of a more refined sound, the Ananda really just takes it away. And so what can I say about Soundstage and Imaging then? And I think the only word is superb. As with all the other planars that I've heard so far, you get an incredibly immersive and almost holographic sense of imaging, unlike anything that I've ever heard with any kind of dynamic driver headphone. Now, just like the Sundara, the Ananda has absolutely excellent imaging. Where the Ananda pulls ahead, though, I think, is in terms of soundstage, and it leaves both the Sundara and absolutely the 6XX in its dust. Now, whether that's comes from the size of the driver itself or from the size of the ear cups and pads, I can't say. But really, really quite impressive. Now, is the staging up there with the likes of the AKG K712 Pro? No, it doesn't go that far. But in fact, the only headphone I've ever heard that comes close is the X2HR. I think that the K712 Pro is kind of an outlier. It's a world into itself. I've not heard another headphone that has a staging like that. Now, maybe the K702s and 6 whatever, maybe the other AKGs in that family probably do, but no other headphone I've heard has a staging like the K712 Pro. But for every other headphone, the Ananda is pretty special. It's up there as one of the better ones in terms of staging. Right, let's talk about price and value. And the RRP of the Hifiman Ananda is $1,000. But I've been seeing them on sale in the UK for around about $650. And they seem to be going for about $700 US. So either way, this is the most expensive headphone that I've ever used. In fact, about £400 is the most that I've ever spent on a single pair of headphones. I'm not sure that I could ever see myself spending over $1,000 for a single pair of headphones. And also because I haven't heard anything else in this $500 to $1,000 price range, I don't have much to compare it to. And that kind of makes me a bad judge of value at this price point. Maybe if money were no object, I'd have a different opinion. But certainly at £650, yeah, I could. I think that's a reasonable price point, and I could see myself paying that much for the Ananda. For my personal budgetary constraints, the Sundara is much closer to what I would consider to be affordable, but it's clear to see that the Ananda definitely does enough to differentiate itself and improve upon the Sundara in certain areas that I think definitely warrants the extra cost over the Sundara. This is the first headphone in the $500 to $1,000 price point, so I can't really say that much more in terms of value. I'm going to need to hear more headphones in that price range to really judge them on their value point properly. So I'm probably gonna I think that's probably all I'm gonna say at this point. I don't think I am qualified to say any more than that, so I'm going to bring it on to a conclusion. So I previously said that the Hifiman Sundara is simply unbeatable in its price range, and I still agree with that. And in my recent headphone awards video, I said that the Sundara was my headphone of the year. When I tried the Ananda, I didn't quite have the same wow factor that I got going from the usual mid-fi dynamic headphones like the 6XX to the Sundara. Now, the jump from those mid-fi dynamics to the Sundara is massive. It's a absolute definite step up. They are an upgrade in every way on everything else in their price range. You get a certain wow factor when you jump from something like a 6XX to a Sundara that you don't get quite as much of that jump between the to Sundara and the Ananda. There is a jump. There's a definite improvement in quality on several areas. Like I said, with the extension, the more even distribution across the frequency response. You know, they have a more neutral presentation. They've got a better soundstage, and imaging is fantastic. They have some build improvements. Generally, you know, I can see that they are definitely a step up from the Sundara. You just don't get the same wow factor jump. So I think you can look at the Ananda as refinements at this point, whereas you have a jump in quality between the mid-fi dynamics and the Sundara. You get more refinements with the Ananda past the Sundara. So yeah, the Ananda, definitely an upgrade on the Sundara, but I don't think if you can only afford the Sundara, I don't think you should be disappointed with what you're getting between the Sundara and the Ananda. I think the Sundara is so good in its price range that you shouldn't feel that you're missing out. But also, if you can afford the Ananda, I think it is an upgrade in several areas. I mean, you'd have to decide if those particular areas are what you want to see an upgrade in. This is probably the first planar magnetic headphone that I've heard that exhibits those qualities, all of those qualities that people say that planar magnetic headphones exhibit. The Sundara is almost there, but because it lacks that bass extension, it doesn't have the planar bass that people keep going on about. I mean, that's one of the big things that people talk about with planar magnetic headphones is planar bass. And this is the first one that I've heard so far that actually has it. Very, very impressive as well, that bass. That alone, for me, makes the Ananda worth the upgrade over the Sundara. But I don't know that I would skip the Sundara entirely because it has that sort of edgy excitement that I really enjoy in a headphone. So whilst they are quite similar to each other in many ways, they also are quite different to each other. So to conclude then, I think that the Hifiman Ananda is an absolutely fantastic headphone. And I think for that £650 or $700 price point that they're going for at the moment, I think, yeah, I would say they're absolutely worth it. They are a simply excellent headphone. A real good step up from everything else that I've heard so far. So at the start of this review, I said that these are the most expensive, most high-end headphones that I'd ever heard. And so I was expecting the best headphone that I'd ever heard as well. I'm pleased to say that, yeah, this is probably the best headphone that I've ever heard. So at least in this case, you are getting what you're paying for. So I'm going to give these the Wheezy Reviews thumbs up. And I think that's about it for this review of the Hifiman Ananda. If you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And if you want to support the channel, then check the links down in the description. As always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, have a good one.